You can't replace part of the brain. Like, you
treat them the same.
A source of truth for the medtech industry.
Coexists with the province.
Robot understands things automatically.
Number one show in the medtech industry.
So Stryker got ahead of that and changed in the 90s, built $1 billion company that held up high, a lot of things.
State of MedTech with your host, Omar and Khatib.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. This is kind of like a bit of a reunion episode in the sense that our guest today is Michael Farrington. He's the Chief Growth and Transformation Officer over at Corsa Medical. Many of you know him because he was the one who essentially led all of marketing over at Nuvasive through the acquisition to Globus. And he and I actually met before I moved to the SoCal area in San Diego. We were both on stage. I can't remember what MedTech conference it was, but that's how you and I first got to know each other. We've stayed in touch since. And so today I'm really excited to have you on the show because we're going to cover like three really interesting areas. For the most part, like you're one of, I don't know, maybe even not even less than 5 people that I know who've kind of gone through this, where you led the transformation on the go-to-market side for like a company like Nuvasive in their most important years, right? Then there's this whole transformation when it comes to the people and culture, because you're essentially, I think, Chief People Officer over at Nuvasive, right? There's a lot of learnings there, especially for such a wildly successful company. And then you stayed on board for a good amount of time through that M&A transition and had a lot of learnings there. So there's these 3 really interesting phases of your career that I'm so grateful that you're open to sharing.
Yep.
And welcome on the show, man.
Thanks, Omar. Long-time listener, friend for quite some time. Really proud of your success and listened to a lot of past episodes. So it's awesome to be on myself.
Absolutely. And maybe, before we jump into all that, can you give us like a quick 1-minute bio overhead of like who is Michael Farrington? Where'd you grow up and how did you end up in the industry?
Yeah. So by chance is the short answer. So grew up in Southern California. My father was in sales and marketing in the athletic industry for his entire career at ASICS, primarily ASICS America. My mom has her master's in art history. So I always saw kind of this fusion between business and art and storytelling. They actually met, fun fact, at Disneyland over 50 years ago. And so there's always this kind of the role of story and strategy kind of in my head. I knew at a young age that I was a little driven and started meeting with different people when I was 15, 16 years old and just sat them down and say, how did you get to where you got to? And one of those people, Omar, was an individual named Jake St. Philip. Jake at one time was the general manager of Alaris Medical Systems that was acquired by Cardinal Health. He ended up running the Western commercial organization for all of Cardinal Health. And he, through a mentorship relationship, got me plugged in at Cardinal at 22 years old. I was given a couple $100 million product line in infusion therapy, had no idea what I was doing. And within 1 year, federal marshals showed up, seized a couple 100,000 devices, issued a class 1 recall, and it was ready, fire, aim from the first year of my career. So that's the entry point into this space. Have been in medtech healthcare for about 20 years. And it's been a fast, fun ride. But that thread of ready, fire, aim has stayed with me through those 2 decades.
That is a hell of a way to start your career, by the way. Wow. That must have been wild.
It was, but it's one of those moments where you can't, I listen, people go to get an MBA and go to grad school for various reasons. You cannot replicate what learning on the job looks like, right? So another one would be, hey, we're going to spin out a Cardinal and launch CareFusion. You have 6 to 9 months to launch a new $4 billion brand in 100 countries. Ready, go. Now, you could try to replicate that in a class, in a 3-month semester at Wharton or something. It would be a fun kind of theory project, but to do it, that was another ready, fire, aim.
I love it. And by the way, just a side note, just because our audience are huge readers, are you familiar with Michael Masterson's, it's an old book, but it's called Ready, Fire, Aim?
No, but I am writing that down right now.
You got to get that book, and when you read it, let me know. It's
Okay.
It's in a top 5 book by a lot of really big entrepreneurs. Probably the more famous one that a lot of the audience here knows is Alex Hormozi. That's in his top 10 that he constantly rereads. but
Love it.
really, really good book. But
Cool.
yeah, I
Thank
think
you.
you would personally like it. So,
Love it.
well, so let's kind of start at the beginning. So you're essentially senior director of global marketing at Nuvasive. You were around 2015, 2016. You rose quite rapidly in the organization, and that's how I first learned about you. Aside from the conference you're at, because Nuvasive at that point was such a high function and highly competitive, highly talented organization that in order to sort of like grow the organization, like you had to do some pretty remarkable things. Like, what was it like when you essentially led like these sort of transformative go to market strategies?
Mhm.
And we talked before about it, but you had this sort of process of applying a framework such as like where to play and how to win. Can you
Yep.
talk to us a little bit what that looked like, and how did you start to learn how to win? I think is the big thing.
Great question and good starting point. So let me start off by saying, anything that I have accomplished in my career, one is comes from either doors that are unlocked from my God, my support of my family, my amazing wife, and 4 kids. Omar, get going! You got to catch up. And the role of mentors and teams in my life. I'm a very lucky person, and some of this experience, Omar, has been right place, right time. But really where my thinking, I feel like, kind of got unlocked and changed was after CareFusion was acquired by Becton Dickinson. So if you remember, CareFusion spun out from Cardinal Health, had about a 5-year run as a standalone company. Up until Covidian, the Covidian story, the future Bard acquisition by BD, CareFusion at $12+ billion was one of MedTech's biggest acquisitions ever. And we spent a year as marketers being trained by the team at BD on marketing excellence. And I have to admit, credit to Nabil Shabshab, who's now a CEO outside of BD. Some of my colleagues, Kathy Sullivan, who I don't know if she's still there, but I remember going to Farrington Lakes and being trained on marketing excellence at BD. And I thought, what the hell is this 100-plus-year-old company going to teach us at CareFusion? Fun, sexy, kind of nimble company about marketing. Lo and behold, was at a barbecue in LA a year or two later, and was sitting down with the pitmaster. And the guy said, "Hey, have you gone through BD's marketing excellence?" I said, "Yeah." He's like, "Well, I wrote that. That's my work." I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" So Dr. Bernie Jaworski, probably, I think, the foremost thought leader in marketing, maybe in the world in the last couple of decades, but at least in the U.S. He's the chair of the Drucker School at Claremont McKenna, tenured faculty at USC. His resume is incredible. He just published a book a couple years ago called The Organic Growth Playbook. And all of his research and work for years before that, including the curriculum developed in partnership with BD, was around this central idea that inorganic growth is pretty easy. If you got cash and you got assets and you've got the ability to buy growth, okay, great. And that's still to pull off the right deal at the right price at the right time. That takes there's science, not just art there. But organic growth, that is hard. That is really
Very hard. Very hard.
And the framework is as simple as that, which is like, at the end of the day, we have to make bets of where we're going to play, and then ultimately how we're going to win in those markets. And as part of that effort, Omar, where you're going to play, while that's really important, where you're not going to play is almost as important, right? And so I've got, I've right time, right place, luck, have had some interesting experiences where I've been able to test that theory in different places, that, market selection, where you're going to play is so critical. Equally, what markets are we not going to be in is as important. Segmentation. Should you actually go after new customers? There was a period in Nuvasive where our answer was no. We have to drive density. We have to drive depth to pursue what we called the perfect case index, the perfect case to go wider in the account and go deeper, not just acquiring new customer after new customer. That actually increases the cost to serve. That's dilutive to the bottom line. That's bad business. So I've had enough experiences where, it goes back to the learning of the organic growth playbook or marketing excellence at BD, coming from Dr. Jaworski. And then I brought Bernie in, and we built that and trained that and used that at Nuvasive as part of kind of our fun run until we ended up selling off to Globus.
Got it. Yeah, and I'm glad you emphasized that, because I think a lot of people, sort of miss that point that yes, to again, whether it's on like paid acquisition strategies or paid growth strategies, anything like that, anything that's paid, like there's definitely an art and science. It's definitely not easy.
Wow.
But the organic growth side requires such a level of not only discipline but discernment, right? And I think what you said is so key there, which is more around, I don't want to call it the negative, but the exclusion of like what are we not going to do and what are we going to say no to, right? I think that's, especially in the startup world, a lot of it's based on like, what are we going to do and novelty and everything, but it's really like, I mean, look, let's use another great example of like a unicorn company, Intuitive. Part of the reason why Intuitive was successful was that in the early 2000s, they were very clear about what they were not going to do anymore, what they were not selling, and that was it.
Yep. One specialty, one discipline, one kill shot, and they executed. And so, to me, to that point, one of my favorite tools that we brought into our toolkit at Nuvasive was customer journey mapping. And sometimes it's like, yes, you build the process or map the process from I want to buy something to I close, and you optimize the process, but truly quantitatively saying, hey, there's 100 hypothetical customers out there that want a cervical plate. How many of them actually transact and use our plate at Nuvasive? Where are the dropout points? And disproportionately, how do we start at the highest point in the funnel to move as many customers through that funnel to close and increase our hit rate organically to drive growth? Really bad marketers will take a journey map and say, Omar, I'm going to tell you the 37 things we're going to do to drive growth in cervical. And I'm going to say to them, you have no idea what the hell you're doing if you have 37 tactics to drive organic growth. Versus the person says, listen, I'm losing 50% of my customers at this step of the journey. I'm going to put every single dollar, focus, time, energy, effort at that one step. So when I shore that up, I'm moving more customers through that process. And then I'm going to deploy my strategy, my dollars to this next step of my buying journey. That's when I know I've got someone that knows what they're talking about, because they're not thinking about just all these disparate strategies, but it's coherent, running from the top of the funnel all the way through close.
When it comes to the discipline to focus on like one step at a time and essentially fixing a leaky bucket, right?
Yeah.
Why do you think marketers, because I don't think a single marketer or marketing leader who listens to the show would disagree with what you just said, but not all of them do what you said. Yeah. Why do you think that is? Why do you think a lot of our peers don't do that? And they focus sort of on this broad, like here's all like the 50 things we're going to do. And these marketing, the annual marketing plans that are like 20, 30 pages long. And I'm like, I don't think you're going to get a quarter of these things done.
You just hit delete, and it wasn't worth the time to work on that plan. Listen, for a ton of reasons. And I would probably roll them all up to generally be, there's a ton of pressure, whether you're public or private, to drive growth fast. And so in an attempt to catch the fish, you've got 17 lines on the back of your boat and you're hoping something catches, okay? At the end of the day, we don't have the resources, the budget, the waking hours to run 17 lines on the back of the boat. We don't. Can we all admit we cannot do that? So take Corsa, right? I'm early into the journey here, really fascinating company, and we'll get to that later. But one of the core businesses here, there's been a lack of focus in the attempt to grab revenue kind of at all costs. And you can sit back and say, I get why, because you want that high single digit, low double digit, high growth med tech narrative behind the business. But you're not going to get it if you're going after 17 submarkets. How do we say no to 14, double down on 3, be excellent at how we're going to go after those 3 markets, and have the discipline to say, no, we're not going to do it. And it generally comes back to the pressure to grow. And it's a real one. I'm not discounting it. But in the end, you end up hurting yourself by chasing the next dollar that's dilutive to the strategy that you need to run.
Yeah. And I think, the other side of it that you sort of highlight here, you mentioned it earlier, which is when it comes to acquisition and growth, that doesn't necessarily mean net new business. A lot of people are sitting on existing business that they haven't thought to say, like, are we actually like capturing 100% of the business that we already have? And a lot of times the answer is no.
And we talked about that at Nuvasive a lot. So, I mean, I used to joke when we go to huge trade shows, and we actually walked away from NAS for a lot of reasons. It's not a real spine society.
I remember that, by the way.
Yeah.
And I respected that.
Guess what? The business didn't suffer. We still delivered growth, right? We actually deployed more dollars in surgeon partnership and education and training than wasting dollars on a massive trade show. That's a whole nother topic for another day. But I tell our teams, like, we actually don't want any more leads at this show. We can't take them. We don't have, from an inventory perspective and a cost to serve model, we don't want the surgeon in Keokuk, Iowa. Like, let someone else have it, because it's going to be dilutive to their business. We want to go deeper and drive density in the accounts we have to improve the margin profile, drive top line, and be a healthier, better performing business that we operate.
One of the things I think a lot of people, when they think about the story of Nuvasive, which, by the way, is still quite new because a lot of this, just happened in the last decade, was the tagline of the organization was speed to innovation. Yeah. And something that I think is often missed was the speed to innovation, like around business model and strategy. Do you feel like a lot of, like, for you and the rest of the marketing organization, that was an inspiration about, like, we have to be innovative, not just on the products, but also on our business models?
Totally. And that's where, and listen, there's a countless number of people that made Nuvasive what it was, greater than my role. Early days, people that have gone off still in spine doing some great things, some still in spine doing some interesting things. And those of us that kind of came in the later chapters that really tried to professionalize and grow Nuvasive to be credible. And that was, Omar, to your point there, like, the international strategy was one of those plays, right? The knock on Nuvasive for a while was a one-trick pony and lateral in the US. Now listen, incredible job driving reproducibility of a unique procedure with really unique IP to make Nuvasive what it was. When you look at why Globus ultimately acquired Nuvasive, one of those reasons was the international strength that Nuvasive brought to Globus, more than 2x that of Globus. That was a deliberate strategy to diversify, to deploy investments in high growth markets, say no to sub-markets that were still attractive but not worth it to pursue internationally, but to grow, to build another healthy vertical. And that's that business model evolution, the pursuit of cervical, right? Large untapped market for Nuvasive, needed to deploy both organic growth and inorganic. Bought arguably the best total disc replacement with simplifying the market, incredible data. It organically built the thinnest ACDF plate in the market, incredible implants to build out an entire portfolio to go after a $2+ billion submarket. That was a deliberate business model and strategy to go deploy capital, pursue that market. And so, I think those were some of the reasons why Globus ended up spending $3 billion plus to merge with Nuvasive, was because we made some deliberate hell yeses, but we also made some deliberate hell nos to keep our focus, narrowly focused on executing and growing the business in a healthy way.
So part of being able to have that focus is essentially, it can't be just opinion. Like, you need data, you need like objective things to discuss. And so I'm wondering, before we get into the people side, like just on the GTM/marketing side, what kind of digital tools did you prefer to use? Like, what's, I guess, like, back then, what was your tech stack like that was really, integral to the organization? And then now, like, moving forward as chief growth for Corsa, what is sort of the foundational tech stack that you're like, we got to start with this? What kind of comes to mind?
Yeah, great question. I mean, 10+ years ago, that space changes every 3, 6, 9, 12 months, right? So
isn't it insane what we have available now? Can you imagine if you and I had this stuff like even 10 years ago, 5 years ago?
Oh, totally, right. So it pains me to say 10+ years ago, it was a heavy lift of bringing in a McKinsey and a BCG to do some heavy consulting kind of framework model, market mapping exercise. And I mean, now fast forward, shout out to Acuity MD, like I can build all my market maps, identify targets, build real-time leads, serve those up into our CRM, and be off and running with even redesigning rep territories in like 90 days. It's a totally different ballgame. So yeah, heavy manual 10 plus years ago and heavily automated now. So between AcuityMD, Salesforce.com here at Corsa, and we've got, with some other kind of commercial analytic tools and engines. We've got, I think, a pretty good tech stack for what we're going after. And that was not the case a decade ago.
Yeah, definitely a decade ago. I mean, just something that comes to mind that is, I don't want to call it simple, but it's kind of like the tip of the iceberg. But how many hours did both you and I spend over the years creating SOPs, and then ChatGPT comes? Like, I think all the time about that. Like, how much time did I spend putting together an SOP or an executive summary or something, right? And I'm like, now ChatGPT literally does it. I mean, like in less than a minute, like it's unbelievable.
Think about, and I don't know if this transitions us to the next chapter, but think about every job description written online right now. I want a head of global product with 15 years experience, preferred engineering, in medical device, and you get your job description written in 30 seconds. Done. I don't think there's a single job description written right now that's not written by ChatGPT or some AI tool.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and it's funny because we're sort of like reaching that point where like all these AI tools are kind of developing their own, like they're not their own problems, but like anytime you introduce new technology, it like solves a bunch of things, but also like like one of the, I mean, quick sidebar, but like no one would have predicted this, but like one of the issues with these LLMs is that they hallucinate. So there's literally programs being developed so that your LLM does not hallucinate when you talk to it. So like, who would have thought about that, right? It's just kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that we've talked about in the past is that you've talked about the value of, let's say, like talent over technology. So
yeah,
what exactly happened? Because I remember when I saw it happening, I thought it was really interesting. And for me, it just indicated that you had developed enough trust and credibility with both the marketing and sales and commercial organization that you were able to move into this sort of like chief people officer position.
Yeah.
How do you identify and cultivate like the right talent that aligns with the company and sort of organize all these people to be in alignment and rowing in all the right direction? Because this happened before. I think it happened a little bit before the Globus acquisitions, correct?
Yeah. So it started. So a couple of things. One, credit to Pat Lencioni. I think anything he writes is near gospel. And if you look at the core of just the 5 dysfunctions of a team, he always says the absence of trust is the breakdown of every team. And I say that repeatedly almost every day. I don't care if it's a marriage, a friendship, a business relationship. If there is no trust, it's really hard to get anywhere with anyone. And so, I hope my record speaks for itself, but I'm the first one to say I'm not the smartest person in every room. I will try to outwork someone, but I will try to come alongside and build trust so that we win together versus you and I competing for airtime within an organization. And so, I to your point, like spent a decade at Nuvasive building trust. That being said, I always tell people that marketing is the science of changing human behavior. If you work at Coke and I drink Pepsi, you're trying to convert me to drink Coke Zero over Diet Pepsi. How do you move me from point A to point B? That's the science of changing a human, which, by the way, is really hard, right? Humans generally
very hard.
Change. And so I would, for quite some time, I said, well, gosh, if I and we can do that with a product or a service or a good, why can't that same science be applied to people? Like, how could you move a piece of human capital from A to B? How could you acquire talent? How could you develop talent? How could you train talent? How could you exit talent? To me, it's the same science that could be applied to human capital. And even if an organization says that talent or people is not their most important asset, which I would disagree with, we can at least agree that it's your most expensive asset. So are you applying the science of upskilling talent, bringing better talent in, as you would pursuing new tech, big tech, a new or an organic strategy, an inorganic strategy? Are you deploying that same thought and framework to your people? And through a subsequent series of events, I was given the chance to go after the chief people officer role. My CEO at the time, Chris Berry, who's now number 2 with Brian Hansen at Solventum, after his tenure at CEO of Nuvasive, said, Mike, you're crazy. I'm going to go back to the board and say the guy that we should have hired all along is actually sitting in the org, and he is actually in marketing, has never done HR. And I said, you're right. That only could have happened because, to your point, trust was already established. Number one. Number two is there was a great team in place, and credit to the team that was there on the HR side. One of them is actually moving in to be the head of HR now at Globus, replacing me now that I've left. And though the third piece is the openness of the board at Nuvasive at the time to apply some of these tools in marketing to a people discipline. So whether it was an employer brand, whether it was actually the customer journey mapping applied to talent acquisition. If someone's looking for a job, what's the dropout rate by step where we're losing really good talent, right? Stay interviews, similar to a focus group for, in a go-to-market. Hey, Omar, like, you're here at Nuvasive for 5 years. Why are you still here? How do we implement stay interviews in that same discipline in marketing, but apply that to people talent? And I will tell you that period at Nuvasive, and then having the chance to stand up the people function at Globus, integrating 6,000-7,000 people post merger, was just an incredible chapter of my life, and super lucky to be able to do that.
I remember when I first saw it happening, I personally was pretty excited because, again, like, I feel like on the technology side it's one thing, but in our industry I felt like there was a big need for business model innovation, company innovation. And so when I saw that you, with not having this, because when you see chief people officer, you're thinking of somebody with like a heavy HR background.
Mm-hmm.
When I saw you moving into that role, I personally was pretty excited about it, because it made so much sense. Because to be a great marketing leader, you're essentially looking at the business at scale and figuring out how do we unlock value in a way that's going to directly relate to the P&L. And in this case, taking those same models and looking at, like, again, sometimes when it comes to an organization, you can go and continue to like acquire talent, but then maybe you can ask the question of like, well, what talent do we already have existing that there's some value in there that we haven't figured out to unlock and leverage?
Totally. It's actually shocked me that more marketers have not made that pivot. And listen,
do you think it's because there's this thing of like, oh, it's like a soft thing like HR and like people? Do you think that's what it is?
For sure. I mean, there are sub organizations that still treat HR like a personnel department, right? So you have a tainted view of what the function is. Then you have a tainted view of what the work product is. And then you've also got bias of organizations, boards specifically, that don't like taking risk. And so I was, candidly up for an interesting role recently, pretty large company, really large company. And they're like, hey, we love that you have had a different mind. You're a marketer, you're a go-to-market commercial mind. And at the end of the day, I found out I didn't get the role because I was too risky because I didn't have 30 years of HR experience, right? So, there's two sides of that coin. It's the view of the function by the individuals not in the function. And then there's the view of the board or the executive that has to take a little risk. We don't run organizations with, I think, risk tolerances that take risk on really good people. I love frameworks. I think there should be a framework simply built on the will and skill of the average employee. I think if you've got someone with halfway decent skills, let alone transferable skills that have high will, roll the dice. And we generally don't do that in corporate America because it's too risky.
Yeah. And, I'm glad you share that story because I can't tell you. I mean, there's a lot of young professionals who listen to this podcast. Actually, I was looking at our demographics just recently on Spotify, and I think maybe 40% of our listeners are aged between I think 25 and 38. But a lot of them share the same sort of story with me, like through DMs and everything, which is like, oh, I got passed over because I didn't have enough experience, whatever. So for those of you who are listening, even someone with Michael with his background got passed over because he doesn't have a certain amount of experience. So just like, it's part of it. Something I wanted to ask you about, when it comes to building, as you put it, like building a company culture that's going to translate to a P&L.
Yeah.
Falls on the ability to develop alignment, which goes back to like, what's the shared values and language? If you go back to your time at Nuvasive, like there must have been some inflection points that stand out more than others. Can you kind of like take us back to that time and tell, like as Gen Z says, like story time,
So listen, there's public story time and there can be private story time over good gin and tonic or a glass of wine where I can share some other more fun stories.
2025 State of MedTech private mastermind.
Listen, so Nuvasive was always known as having this like crazy maniacal cheetah culture. And actually, literally right here, like the cheetah still lives with me, and it's wherever I go, the cheetah's still with me. And it was kind of Nuvasive, us against the world, and incredible. And there was this like moonshot to be the $1 billion startup, and the company got there. And it was kind of like, oh shoot, what do we do now, right? And I remember sitting with the founder of Airbnb years ago in a group, and he was saying, there's really 3 types of employees that exist. There's entrepreneurs, there's builders, and scalers. And at any phase of any company, you're going to need some combination of all 3. But the worst thing to do is put the wrong skill set in the wrong role based on the gestational life cycle of that company. And what got Nuvasive to $1 billion was a unique profile, heavy entrepreneur with some builders. You got to a place where you needed more builders and some scalers and less entrepreneurs. Not take your foot off the gas pedal of innovation, disruptive innovation, business model innovation. But that mix shifted. And listen, there was a talent exodus for a period from Nuvasive to a handful of other spine companies. If you go back 5+ years ago, and it forced Nuvasive. That was a good thing because it forced Nuvasive to kind of wake up again. And we doubled down on culture. And it was the one thing that got Nuvasive to $1 billion. And my theory was it was going to be the same thing that got it to $2 billion or a $3 billion sale to Globus. Now $10 billion market cap, and that thing is like a rocket ship. There's no touching Globus now. I'll just be on the record of saying that. And so what we started with was one shared voice. And the voice was built around what we called the Cheetah Way. And it was an aligned mindset of our purpose, our values, our competencies, and those strategies. And that every single employee, from the CEO down through an office manager to a field rep to someone in finance, could align to the purpose, could align to the values of we think, we do, and we care, could understand the 9 competencies that support those 3 values and see how our strategies, again, support that work. And after 1 year of launch of the Cheetah Way, we had 90+% of all employees in the next year's engagement survey be able to recite both, the framework of the Cheetah Way paired with the values and the understanding of those competencies. That was a huge monumental task of doubling down on culture. And listen, I believe culture eats strategy every day for breakfast. You can hire any great consulting firm, BCG, McKinsey, Deloitte, whomever, and they could give you a 100-slide deck on what market to go after and what market to not go after. They can't tell you how to operationalize it within you as a leader know the science, the heart, the makeup of your company, and it starts and ends with people and talent.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that a lot of times people throw that phrase around without going into it the way you just did. I think, would you agree that a big part of it, so let me back up for a second. I often see companies like when you get to a certain size, it becomes kind of like a nation state. Like if you look at J&J, for example, or Medtronic, like it's like a country, right? And the executive leadership is literally like royalty, right?
Yeah.
But part of a country is like there's a certain level of brainwashing that's done about like, you know, like we sing a national anthem.
Yeah.
National anthem is an exercise in brainwashing.
Yeah.
But I love that because that's the first time I've heard it, that you essentially you hear it from a commercial standpoint, which is like there's an elevator pitch. We want everybody to memorize this pitch about the product, which is great. But people don't take it a step further, say, hey, like, what's the elevator pitch about our values as a company? How did you guys sort of design that? And then how did you make sure to get employees to like buy into like actually learning that? And of course you guys measured that, because you can't measure, you can't manage it. It's just like,
right.
It's a wish.
So again, we had the benefit of having the Nuvasive of old, that cultural thread. Even though it had changed, people held on to that as something unique to Nuvasive. They wanted culture again to be the tip of the spear, right? And so there was, get already street credit Nuvasive that should be priority one. So there's buy-in. The second is, at the time I wasn't actually in the seat yet. I was working with Lucas Vitale, who's supporting Massimo Calafiore over at Orthofix now, and multi-time sitting a CHRO, fantastic one. And we worked on it together. It's like, how do we, from storytelling and marketing paired with HR, come together to build a common narrative for this company? So it wasn't just an HR program. And it was global focus groups from top on down, every region, country represented. So there's buy-in to the build of the process. And then it's the integration into the fabric of the company. It's like, if leveraging our differences was one of the core competencies, and you were getting a promotion, it was like in the language, either both in the room or in the written note to the company, that Omar's ability to demonstrate leveraging differences was shown in these projects, and his ability to do X, Y, and Z. It was written in, it was verbalized into the fabric of the company, so that it wasn't disingenuous. It was credible and real, and that's when it takes off.
In that process, you took over that role about like, I think, a year and a half outside of the Globus merger. Then that happened, and then you stayed on for about a year.
Yeah.
What was that process like, in terms of essentially keeping it all together? Because a lot of times these M&A, like they're really messy. People don't realize. I mean, I think probably the best example of one that was really messy, it turned out great, but I think for the whole robotic world, it shook things up, was Stryker's acquisition of Mako. It's working great now, but what people forgot was, like, when it first happened 10 years ago, it was a mess for like years.
Yeah. Listen, most deals don't see their true value because of cultural reasons. They fall apart because of the people, talent, culture side. It's not because of the products. It's not the IP that's acquired. It's the how. How do you integrate two disparate cultures? How do you integrate the people? Now, listen, Globus is a very interesting story. Really unique company. David Paul started it from his basement of his house, and built Globus from the ground up with some clear hell yeses that he was not going to move on. One, that he was going to out innovate both in speed, but also just sheer volume than anyone else. And he does that. Look at the IP rankings in spine orthopedics. I think if you added up, Omar, number 2 through 10, Globus would still trump companies 2 through 10 in the number of patents filed every year. It is like innovation, innovation, innovation. The second is own the entire supply chain. And so every building that Globus operates out of in the world, they bought for in cash, no debt. They own every building. They've built every system internally. They've literally constructed the whole process. And the third is they will bring the best commercial talent to the table. They will never change their comp plan. And there's no like one-time decision of truing up with more points to get a market, and then you've got to cut talent. And you see that in every other spine or orthopedic players, the move of talent every 2 to 3 years. And David has not moved off those three. Now, because he has set up the company from the bowels of his office, from his garage 20 plus years ago. He's, a very active chairman, It was clear early on that, and I was clear with him that this is your company, David. It would be foolish if we came in with how unique Nuvasive was and tried to make Globus become Nuvasive or to meet in the middle. And listen, it was a really hard first year, but I was trying to be super transparent. Again, trust, the absence of trust being the breakdown, trust and transparency, the only things that I think you should lead with in a time of massive risk and change. And I told every Nuvasive employee, this is you going into David's house, and you need to get used to their culture. They will be the ones standing on the top of the mountain at the end of this. And they're actually, the latest market research report I read this past quarter had them tied with Medtronic. They'll be the number one player, if not already, here in any day in spine. It's incredible what they built. But shame on us to say, if they're the ones that bought Nuvasive, that we should influence them. It is their company. And I think the more that companies are transparent around culture being the biggest risk to the deal, but mapping for employees what they have to give up to get, that to me is where it breaks down. So I told every commercial leader, if you give up some of your territory to get something in return, to get the Excelsius robot, to get some of their expandables, if you're legacy Nuvasive, you're going to win. If you're Globus, that you give up some of your territory to get XLIF, to get Simplify, to get some unique technology, you're going to win. So you've got to give up to get, and that comes through with culture too. You're going to have to give up legacy Nuvasive culture to get something bigger and better with the new Globus that, is on a tear, and it's the $10 billion market cap speaks for itself.
You've mentioned numerous times about the importance of not necessarily culture, but below that is, or at the foundation of that is trust.
Yeah.
If you were to framework it out in its simplest form, how do you develop, a culture of trust and then build value from that? Like, you're going to be doing that over at Corsa Medical, which is, I want to get to that in a little bit, which is a very interesting business model. Yeah. But like, what does that look like tangibly?
Yeah. They actually studied this with SEAL Team 6 years ago, and they looked at what made great SEAL Team 6 members. And they constructed essentially an X and Y axis around trust on the battlefield and trust off the battlefield. So think performance and execution while being a SEAL Team member, and again, trust maybe with someone's life on the battlefield performance, and trust with their wife if you're hanging out with your buddy's wife off the battlefield. Like, do I trust you with my wife and life? And they found out that the most impactful, best talent were not and we'd all agree we want the high on both continuum, right? We don't want the low. Ultimately, the people that made through, that had the longest stickiness, that were the most successful, that were the most influential, the ones to double down on 9 times till Sunday, 10 times till Sunday, were high trust off the battlefield and medium performance on the battlefield. Essentially, they weren't an asshole, right? And that to me is it starts with talent selection, Omar. Like, how often, for those that are listening, how often are you assessing your talent? Like, truly assessing your talent. You're discussing, debating, giving hard feedback, putting people on development projects. Do they have development plans? To me, it was a non-negotiable. You have a development plan if you work for me.
So development plans, and for, I guess, the other term people are familiar with, there's like PIP, performance improvement. Yep. Your thing is like, that's not given out when you're underperforming. That's given out regardless.
24/7. It's reviewed ideally, if not monthly, it's reviewed quarterly. Like, it is talent. Because it's the only thing. I mean, listen, take again spine. You line up 20 different ACDF plates and blindfold someone, a surgeon, an amazing surgeon, one that from Greg Mundis at Scripps to Larry Lanke to whomever. They can't pick out a plate to save their life if they're blindfolded. But guess what? They will remember the rep and how they get served and are serviced by them. 10 times over than even the plate design of that ACF plate. And it's like, how do we, as leaders, double down on making talent the number one priority versus that of just focusing everything on innovation or product?
Yeah, I think it's important, especially for the reps listening. A lot of reps, they don't feel, I think it's just they're educated the wrong way. They don't feel empowered, and they feel a lot of them are just kind of stuck. And their thing is like, oh, Mar, what's the next hot thing? What's the next great product? Like, by all means, I always encourage people to go to the place where there's like really unique innovation. But at the end of the day, as a rep, you don't have any control of the business. You have no control on the product. Like, only thing you have really control of is the value that you bring and the style in which you decide to service that account, which, by the way, I think is pretty subjective for the most part, because there are surgeons who have directly told me, like, I use XYZ company, but, when and if this rep leaves, like, I'm following the rep, because all these companies, for the most part, there's like one standard deviation of difference between all the products. So it doesn't matter to me. It's really just the rep who's carrying it. And not because I like them, but because I like to do business and work with them.
Totally. And the flip side of that, though, is, when you're sitting down as an executive looking at a new talent who's been at 6 companies in 18 years, because they sit out for one to then chase the next hot thing, and they bring their surgeons with them. And I'm not going to bet on that person. Like, I will bet on the faithful, the dedicated, the person that's bought in themselves and stuck through some hard times, but also hasn't moved their surgeon because they're not happy for a specific season. That's the rep, guy or girl, I will bet on every single day of the week.
Yeah, totally. I'm the exact same way. And I think what's exciting is that because of social media and LinkedIn, a lot of times what I get really excited about is finding, there's some like luminary figures in our industry. And so I'm trying to always find like, who's the next big name in our industry who's like in their 20s right now? And I think with LinkedIn and a lot of the content media right now, we're getting like glimpses of that. Something I want to ask you about is that what's unique, again, you share love like me for frameworks. I have a whole, after our episode, I'll share with you, I have a whole shelf of books on frameworks. A lot of them come from the management consulting world. So you've been part of like some really big deals in our industry. So one is the CareFusion spinoff, and then the CareFusion BD integration, and of course the build of Nuvasive, and then the sale to Globus, and then the integration. Are there some common themes that you've kind of noticed there? Like when you take that experience that you've gone through, what are the frameworks that you have and mental models you have in your mind that you're kind of bringing forward into Corsa Medical? And, from there, I want to leap into like some of the things that you're interested or most excited about in Corsa.
Well, so 2-second tangent. Corsa, about $500 million plus top line, founded in 2019 in partnership with GTCR, arguably one of the most respected PE firms. Biggest check they've ever written in healthcare. They have a deliberate strategy to invest into leaders, and so in partnership with Greg Lucier, who's touched, I don't know, at this point now maybe $40 billion in healthcare M&A in his career. Former CEO of LifeTech, former CEO of Nuvasive, has stood up this this new entity with 4 kind of unique business units in ophthalmology, wound closure, biosurgery, and biotextiles. High single digit, low double digit growth, really attractive EBITDA profile, really unique company. Okay.
Real quick, just for the listeners who might be driving and listening to this, to learn more, go ahead and go check out their websites. It's Corsa.com. It's Corza.com. But sorry, please go. I just want to make sure we plug that in so they can go check it out.
Appreciate that. But listen, at the end of the day, there's handful of learnings. I think number one is you have got to take risks. And when you sit back in the heyday of Nuvasive, at a board level, we were always debating where to go. We had a North Star, but there was always the what if, right? What if you were able to grab that company, divest that, add it here, sell off that? And at the end of the day, you'd always have to come back to what strategy unlocks the most value creation. And it comes with taking risk, right? Cardinal Health had to take a risk to spend a lot of money to buy tech. They had to take a risk to spin off the MedTech portfolio to build CareFusion. BD had to take a risk to write a $12 billion check, right? We had to take a risk to create more value, which at time people thought the merger with Globus kind of undervalued Nuvasive for what it was, but it wasn't about the near term. It was to get to, and Globus is gonna be there, $100 plus stock in the matter of 36 months post sale. Like, it's gonna happen. And so you always come back to take risks to unlock value. That's thread number one. The second is, no shock based on my earlier comments, it takes really good people to do really hard things. So I go back to Kieran Gallahue and Jim Heinrichs at CareFusion, two incredible people that have had their hands on a ton of things. By the way, Greg Lucier was on the board, helped bring in Kieran to CareFusion, right? You look at BD and what Tom Pullen has built. Incredible mind, incredible team. You go down the thread, look at what Nuvasive, in the heyday of Nuvasive, just who has gone on to run, to actually sit in a CEO seat. There are a number of leaders at Nuvasive that are now sitting or have sat in a CEO seat. It takes really good people. And so, that's my thread on culture over strategy. Like, are you building the best team possible? So what are we doing here at Corsa? We have a pretty damn good team, and we're gonna build an even greater team like that. We're gonna bet on talent, right? I think at the end of the day too, it is also about the spirit of learning. So I've got a sign here I always have in any office, which is from Michelangelo, supposedly, and when he was 87, completing St. Peter's Basilica, he wrote in a corner, "Ancaro Imparo," which is "I'm still learning." Is there a curious mindset in your organization to not take the status quo, but to push and to push and to push and to learn, and stay curious? And I think really great companies, and thankfully I've been a part of great teams that had this notion. We were curious. CareFusion was a curious culture. Nuvasive was a curious culture. Greg has embedded into Corsa this notion of, he always diverges to converge. So it's like, can you stay with him to diverge intentionally so that ultimately you converge around even better idea? So those are the three things that come to mind. Take risk, center around value creation, build really good teams, and teams and people and orgs that have a current of curiosity.
I want to dig a little bit more into that specifically because, one thing. Our industry is very competitive when it comes to talent. As you mentioned, I think spine's a great example. I mean, every time I would go to a spine conference, I felt like it was a wedding because I'm like, oh, like you were over here and now you're over there. Just like, it's kind of like incestuous and people are just constantly going around. So it's tough to attract talent. It's even harder to retain them. And then even more so now, I think it's the most exciting time to be in medtech and healthcare because now you have the biggest companies on planet Earth, Apple, Microsoft, Google, etc., whose fiduciary responsibility is to grow. The only thing that's left is like healthcare. Even Tim Cook came out and said like the biggest contribution Apple's going to have in healthcare. So all that's great.
Yeah.
Well, the other side of that is that we have even more competition to compete with talent. So like at Corsa, without like sharing too much, like how do you think about unique ways to go about getting the attention of talent and attracting them to Corsa versus going to work for like the Apples of the world or Intuitive or Globus or anybody else?
Yeah. I mean, listen, every market or sub-market needs disruption. And so I can't tell someone that going to work for some skunkwork Google project, curing cancer with the human genome and some, Lord knows what they're working on, then like, I can't compete against that.
Yeah. For those listening, by the way, I just have to comment, Google, no offense, guys, is great at like their life science. They're great at raising money, really good at raising money. I don't know if I can name a single product that actually made it to market. Can you? I can't. So
No, I mean they tried with Verb and anyway, so that don't tell Scott that. And yeah, well that's
no, but you know what? Look. I'm gonna say it. I mean, Scott's a friend of yours. He's a friend of mine. But I'm gonna make a comment. Just I don't think this is controversial to say, but a great example about culture is that I think part of the reason why it didn't go over so well at J&J was J&J acquired Oris and Verb and did a very, very bad job of figuring out how do we take two companies with a lot of talent and integrate them and align the culture. I think that's what fell apart. I don't think it was a technology issue. I think it was a culture issue.
Yeah. So I mean, listen, it's really hard for big companies in medtech, or so from Google to a J&J, to be disruptive. And so that's what are they going to do? They are going to inorganically acquire disruptive technology. That's just it's a safer bet for them. They're so big, they're so bureaucratic to do that organically. It's low odds at this point. And so that's why I always tell people, like, you make every market submarket needs to be disrupted. So get with a company that's trying to disrupt something. Add arrows in your quiver. Keith Feil, CFO of Globus, always says that about his career. It's like add arrows in your quiver. And so find moments where you can disrupt. And I do think it's what's kept me in healthcare for 20 plus years is the chance to do well while doing good. And take our ophthalmology strategy, take our biosurgery business unit with Taco Seal, a trusted brand for decades that is just on a warpath of continued growth. You can do well by doing good here, either in an established brand like that or something like an up and coming thing like in our textile space. In every market, textiles in itself need disruption. So yeah, those are my two kind of rallying cries to people to consider Corsa or wherever else I've been, is come to a place where there's disruption, whether it's it's easier, by the way, in the small places. And then second is you can do well in this industry by doing good. And I found it to be true in my career.
I'm with you on that. I think what's interesting is, at least I try my best to give advice on this podcast, so like I don't get asked the same question in my DMs constantly. But for those who are listening, like the one thing I would say, because I always get asked like, what's the next like hot technology, Omar, what market? And I think there is such a thing, but I think what's more important is to kind of pay attention to who are the people who, of course, there's always like new and up and coming people, great. But there's also some people who've actually had some tried and true success in this industry. You're one of those people. Greg is another. And I always tell people, like, pay attention to where those people go, because often they'll go and through their sphere of influence, they attract other A players. And I think that Corsa is one of those places, because it got on my radar because I was following Greg, and then I linked up with you. I learned that you're going over there. So I think that's like one thing I would encourage the audience of this show to do is like go to Corsa's website and check out what kind of careers are there. Because again, I think what's interesting is that you guys have your portfolio of companies, which is exciting.
Yeah. Well, I to be mentioned with Greg is humbling. He's at a stratosphere unlike my own. But to your point is, be around good people, and specifically people that are better than you. If you want to be a hog farmer, like go learn from the guy that raises more hogs than someone else. Learn from him, and then go do your own thing, right? And so, be surrounded by greatness, and I think we're going to attract some people that want to be part of Greg's next move. Some have already come and have helped him build it since 19, and I think some are going to be here for the next ride, as he was now recently named CEO, in addition, stepping back into the CEO role in addition to his chairman role. So it's come join Corsa. It's going to be a fun ride.
Yeah, and I'm excited, personally for you. And again, thanks for coming on the show and spending some time with us. I definitely want to have you back, just kind of share some updates, like maybe a year in. But I think what's exciting for you is that I think this new task of yours is going to require even more focus and discipline from you, because you don't technically have one company, you have like more than one. Yep. And so the ability to like really lay a foundation of excellence and values is going to be really interesting. Because I would imagine, do you feel like there's going to be a foundation of values that's shared across the org, but each company is going to kind of have its own flavor of how they do things, like, and how do you manage that without it going too far off from the foundation?
Totally. And to clarify, to be clear, like we've got one company, multiple different business units, but still from very different legacies. Like our textiles business, Omar, was our factory in Western UK, about 2 hours west of London, been in production for 250 years. They did the Queen's silk on her coronation dress in the 1800s, right? I mean, like incredible history paired with some newer verticals that have got 10 years of brand equity, right? And yet we're a 4-year-old company. And so, you need to have enough flexibility to have, the view of Corsa, the why Corsa, but also the individual, both brand, but business unit value, because in a private equity world, you're always going to add, subtract, grow, expand. It's going to be a little more dynamic than that of, anything that is generally for profit or, publicly traded. So,
sure.
I mean, listen, and to your point, I think to me, what I love about this growth and transformation role is it's going to leverage my 2 decades plus of marketing, go-to-market, people, culture, influence, kind of all wrapped up in one role. And that's why I'm super humbled and ready to get started here.
Well, look, I appreciate you coming on the show. I got one last question for you. It might take you some time, but I'm gonna take as much time as I can get right now. You have had this sort of rare opportunity. Like if there was a sort of I don't want to call it a Mount Rushmore, maybe that's the wrong term, but like there's a list of like a who's who in our industry, and you can kind of map a coaching tree back to them of like really influential execs. So Greg Lucier is one of those people. You've sort of been on his right side for a long time now, and he's bringing you again to Corsa, which speaks volumes in terms of the work that you did alongside him at Nuvasive. What were some of the most important lessons that you learned from him? I'm sure there's many, but is there one that sort of stands out more than others? Like what's something that you've learned from somebody like Greg?
Yeah, I mean, he's probably had the biggest impact on my career, and you need to get him on the podcast. I know he's hard to track down, but let's make that happen here in 25. So I don't know, sneak peek. I think he's coming on, so we'll make that happen. A lot of things. I mean, the taking risk is one of them. If you go back to his career, I mean, when he was at GE, no one left Jack Welch, and he was, I want to say, maybe the youngest GM ever of a business there. Was working for Jeff Immelt. And walked away to be CEO of this, crappy little company called Invitrogen at the time, and was chastised. What are you doing? This is a bad move. Ends up selling Life Tech for, I think, $16 billion once he finished his work there, and he took risk. My comment on diverge to converge, that's from him. Like, how do you ideate? And not just take the first idea, but continue to build on the idea. It's the one rule of improv acting. You can't say no. It ends the scene. If you're like, hey, so we're here at McDonald's, Omar, and you're like, no, we're not. We're at Burger King. You're like, all right, well, end scene. The scene's over, right? Like you have to say yes. And leaning into ideas to diverge, even if they're crazy, don't make sense, but just to run and see where it goes. Requires certain curious minds, right? Can you take a thread and play it out, even if you're not going to run with it, but play out that thread. Listen, the investment of people. He is someone he could easily sit back, A, retire, B, not take a phone call. I mean, almost every day of the week, he is meeting with young talent, early talent that used to work with him. He's doing a favor for someone, adding someone to this board. And, he himself would say he's in the later stages of his career. There's no knock on his age. And yet he's still investing into the talent that got him there and the talent that is, I think, going to build and shape this industry for the next decades to come. And that speaks a lot about people like Greg. And there's a lot of people like that. Massimo Calafiore, incredible person, chief commercial officer at Nuvasive, now CEO of Orthofix, an example of that puts, I think, people over strategy. You look at guys like Jim Heinrichs, Kieran Gallahue. I mean, there's certain coaching trees of people, the Kieran Legacy, ResMed. You just go down. Their trees they reflect who they reflect them well with taking the right level of risk, constantly learning to Amparo to investing into the talent that, again, got them there and or will be here in this space in the decades to come.
That's awesome. And, I thank you so much for sharing that. And of course, coming on the show. And again, I'm grateful for people like you in the space, because we have some, there's some like really talented people. I mean, for you could technically go into any industry that you want, and you choose to kind of stay in medtech. I mean, let's face it, like it's a tough industry, man. Like, we're in a really tough business. But I'm very proud that I get to work alongside people like you, and the people like you are sticking around in the space versus, jumping off to something else,
And listen, you play a critical role in being a mouthpiece for what we're doing. And so true credit for you. We need more people like you, but you're doing it pretty damn well. So not that I want someone to take your role. So great job.
I appreciate it, man. Well, Michael, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm looking forward to having you back like in a year, just kind of report back with the updates and everything. And for those who are listening, go give Corsa a follow online, but also check out their website. So go to Corsa.com. That's Corza.com. I'm your host, Omar Khatib. We're the #1 podcast for a reason. Give us a like and subscribe. Give us 5 stars, of course. And if you haven't already, go to stateofmedtech.com, sign up for the newsletter. You'll get a lot of great content that you don't otherwise see. That being said, we'll see you all next time. Thanks for checking out this episode. If you want to do me a big favor and join so many other people who have helped grow this podcast, take a second and look below. If you're on Apple, give us 5 stars and write a short review. If you're on Spotify, just give us 5 stars. And if you're on YouTube, hit the like button. And most importantly, if you can, subscribe. We release so many different episodes that you may miss. Be sure to subscribe and turn your notifications on. You get extra points with me if you subscribe across all 3 channels. Thank you so much. And if you felt like this episode helped you, send this to somebody who'd really enjoy and appreciate it. Share and spread the love. We'll see you all next time.